As things heat up this summer, I always have to watch out extra carefully because unlike you, my friend, I do not have the gift of tanning well. So we've got Brandon here today on Talking Sense, and we're talking about not getting burned or letting those burns sting for too terribly long. I will say I am just this side of albino, I say all the time. I tend to do this burn peel cycle, which is weird because when I was younger, I tanned. I was a lifeguard for like 10 years. But as I have aged, I have become more and more sensitive to the sun. And my kind of crowning moment with sunburn was a couple of years ago. I went to a soccer game, cloudy day, which you probably can't appreciate getting burned on a cloudy day. I did. And it was only my calf because I was in capris and shoes. I was at soccer. And y'all, I carried that burn through the fall. It was so bad. My skin was affected all the way through the fall. So yeah, I can appreciate the pain of getting burned. But you told me a story about getting burned. Even you were able to get burned under some very specific circumstances. Let's talk through that.
Yeah, I don't typically get burned, but we had my parents had a work trip up in Colorado, and I went to a water park for 8 or 10 hours that day. And between that and the altitude, I did get burned, and I'll never forget that. So if I ever go back to Colorado and go to a water park, I will remember sunscreen.
There you go. So like even someone who doesn't burn easily can burn in the right circumstances. And I've noticed that some people we're meeting with demonstrate some hesitancy about investing because they have been burned or know someone who's been burned in some way. And there are a lot of factors that can play into this. So we're going to address some of those to hopefully help you heal if you have been burned and maybe avoid it if you haven't had that negative experience with investing and maybe get a leg up starting out. But, the reality is, we hadn't had a lot of volatility for a long time. 2008 was the last major recession, and then we didn't have hardly any volatility until 2020. That was a weird black swan kind of thing. It resolved quickly. And then 2 years later, we have another one. So there are a lot of people that I've heard saying, well, should I add now or should I wait because the bottom's coming, recession's coming. They hear all that. So what we're hoping to do today is deal with some of that, what may have caused the drops for some people, or that really it's a catch-22 for me. It's not that the market volatility is bad. It's that you're not prepared for it. Would you agree?
Yeah. I sit in all kinds of client meetings, and we had a client come in and talk about how he got burned back in probably around 1990 when we had a bear market, and he's pretty much stayed out of the market since, and that's greatly affected his retirement.
So
in the long
30
run.
years plus.
Yeah, about 30 years of staying out of the market from getting burned. And he just didn't have a plan. You're an employer plan, and you may listen to what your coworkers do, or you just pick whatever fund you see first, and that came back to bite them.
And I think that's not uncommon. When I do see people who struggle with tolerating that volatility, often they get out at the wrong time, and then they struggle with getting back in to the market, and so they miss the opportunity that's on the other side of that. But really the first thing that I feel like causes that sense of feeling burned or feeling hesitant is that there's an unsuitable or insufficient plan. For me, I'm gonna keep referencing back to sunburns because that's something I have a lot of information and knowledge of personally. I have to have the right sunscreen. If I'm gonna get out in the sun, I have to really plan ahead and have the right sunscreen. I have to have the right volume. Like I can't walk out there in any 15. Okay, I'm talking SPF 30 or more, and I'm reapplying regularly. Okay, asset allocation can only get you so far. And there are a lot of people in our industry who rely purely on asset allocation when they're planning. They don't have what we use is different. We use a flooring and bucketing strategy for our retirement clients. But asset allocation is not going to protect you from the volatility necessarily fully. No investment is without risk. Nothing guarantees you success. So having a plan as opposed to just a bucket of investments is a good starting point, at least.
The 60-40 portfolio, which is what we see lots of people use for retirees, had its second worst year in 2022. And so if you happen to retire in that year and you get a really bad year in both the stocks and the bonds, that's a horrible way to start out retirement. That's one of the main risks is the sequence return risk. And so we saw a lot of people deal with that came in from different advisors.
And explain what that means, that sequence of return risk in layman's terms. How does that affect people who are working towards a goal?
Yeah, so the sequence of returns, you're going to have a market downturn, but if you're also taking income from that plan, so now you've taken the market downturn of a certain dollar amount, but you've also taken out that money. So that when the next year comes around and you need that same income, you have to choose. Do you want to take a decrease in pay, or do you want to take out the same amount and just begin dollar cost averaging, but the wrong way?
Right. And so for younger investors, when the market is dipping, it's actually a benefit to you. And I think that's an opportunity that gets missed. So again, having the right understanding, as the metaphor for the sunscreen, understanding what you're doing and having the right approach to it. Because when the market is down, if you're young, you need to be really intentional about adding. Even if it's not down all the way, guys, you're not going to buy the bottom. Don't try. Just buy. When the market dips, get involved if you're not already. But don't wait for those, because over time, that's not to your benefit either. Not all advisors are created equal either. I've had a lot of experience recently interacting with other advisors through conferences and some different things. Licensing is what determines your tool set. And there are a lot of advisors who choose to do the simpler of the tests, the 6. So we have a few different combinations of tests we can do. There's the 6 or the 7. The 7 is kind of the big mamma jamma. The 6 is like the little brother. Okay. And a lot of them are choosing to go that route, which means there are certain products they cannot sell. They cannot use them, or tools they cannot use to serve their clients. Their training is going to affect that. We've got biases. I mean, everybody's going to have some, but our training has us biased towards planning. We are not asset allocation people. Right?
No.
But that changes how. And then for us, continuing education is a part of who we are as a team. So we're always growing, always learning. That's not the case everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. We plan first and then we pick investments. You know, you may come in for an initial appointment here and we'll probably not even mention investments. We may mention a category of them and just see how you feel about something or get your risk tolerance down. But we don't talk about investments until you come back and see what the plan dictates.
Right. And just like having the right sunscreen, I also have to reapply. I think sometimes people, will get into a plan, or they've got a pool of investments and they just kind of let it sit, which to a degree is good. If you're young and you've got a good strategy already in place, so you've already got a good plan, let's start with that because not everybody does, then letting it just sit is fine. But I have to reapply sunscreen regularly. I have to check in with myself. I have to see it. Does my skin feel hot? Things like that to make sure that what I'm doing is working. You've got to do the same thing with your investments. I have had a story I've shared about Scott, one of our advisors here. His first 401k, he bought a high yield fund. Now you're laughing because you know what that means. But for those that may not know what that means, he bought a bond fund when he was in his 20s. Bonds are not meant to be growth chasers. They're meant to be income providers. And he did not understand what he was getting into. And if you're just letting that sit, or you have a cash fund or a stable value fund, and you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s even, and you're just letting it sit, you're not getting the most out of what could be your strategy. So checking in to make sure that what you're doing works really, really matters.
Yeah, I think it's great to check back in with your advisor at least on an annual basis, if not more often. We have people that have life changes, and those are important things, whether you're going through job loss or switching jobs or moving. Those are important things and can dictate how your plan needs to go, or you may decide you want to retire a lot earlier.
Yes, and for some, they retire before they want to, but because they have to. So when is the last time you met with your advisor to review things and make sure that the strategy you're using is actually working like it's supposed to? There's even been clients that I put them in a strategy and it was supposed to do a certain thing, and then in 2020 it did not do what it was supposed to do. Now, should they have had some exposure? Yes, but it shouldn't have been as great as it was. We had to make changes. But if they're not connecting with you and they're not making that a priority, then you're probably in the wrong place. So, you got to have your sunscreen, but you also got to reapply. And then planning ahead really, really matters, because market volatility is coming. Are you ready?
I jumped into the market right after 2020, and then I didn't experience anything until 2022. And you get all those gains from when we went down with COVID, and then you're not used to the volatility. You just keep seeing it go up and up each day you check, and then you get back one day and it's dropped a significant amount. And it even shocked me to see it do that. So.
And you have a finance degree, if I remember correctly. So, even those of us that really understand, and it was hard even for me on my own accounts, because, I did start later. So there was an emotional gut check I had to give to remind myself of my plan, which again is why I feel like they're so important, so that I didn't make an emotional decision in the moment that would actually set me back long term.
You don't want to take a paper loss and turn it into a real one. That's a bad mistake to make.
So when you do that, when you know, some of those emotional things that we can see if you don't have a good plan to keep you on track is selling in a down market, getting greedy in an up market. We saw that. And then jumping on bandwagons. So I could think of two financial like investment bandwagons that have happened in the last several years. There was one a few years ago with GameStop. You remember that one? So this person decides they're going to stick it to the man and we're all going to buy GameStop so we can drive up the price because they had shorted the stock. Well, the people who got in early could sell later on before it dropped back down and probably make a profit. You know, the ones who started this whole thing that were going to stick it to the man that made a ton of money. But everybody else who bought it on the way up, they were buying a stock for more than it was worth. But they thought they were doing something that was going to make them money because, the price has jumped. Well, yes, because demand is high right now, but then they lost their shirt if they didn't sell it at the right time.
Yeah, you hear all the positive stories, all the people that made a lot of money, but you don't see all the people who helped push it up that didn't make any money. They might have lost a lot.
Yes, and then I think of cryptocurrency. And I'm not against cryptocurrency. I will say it when it comes to what we do, which is retirement planning, I don't feel like it's the right fit because of the volatility. We've had thousands of companies come and go in just a short number of years. And then just, I say recently, but it feels like it's been more than a year ago. There was a CEO who got in trouble for misusing the funds, reallocating them to other projects without client permission because there's not regulation in that industry. So, there are a lot of like fancy looking bells and whistles out there that you can get involved in and it can really hurt you long term. So the question really is, what are you working towards? What is the goal?
Yeah, it's something we ask our clients in the meeting. What's your goal? We may have some intermediate goals. We may have long-term goals for retirement, but it's important to know you can't make a plan and stick to it if you don't have a goal. You have to have something to work towards.
Yes. So just to recap, you've got to have a plan. It cannot be unsuitable or insufficient. Planning ahead really does matter. And then really the last point we wanted to make is learn as much as you can. I mean, since I've started working at GenWealth, it's been almost 11 years. I have learned so much just being around it. Even before I got into this industry myself, there was so much that I was learning, and it's because I was in that environment and surrounded by it.
Yeah, I've done more learning in the past year working here than I did in my entire college career. Sorry to my college, but I just learned a lot on the job that I would have never learned anywhere else. So that hands-on experience and just asking your advisor questions if you're a client, asking them questions. First and foremost, we should be a teacher at heart, and we should teach you when you come in. And if we don't know the question, we should go and ask somebody who does or find the resources to get you that answer.
Yes. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions that can exist if your only resource is TikTok or Facebook or Google. There are people out there who will tell you that a certain product type is just, they're all bad. And there's some that they truly are, but those are few and far between. There was a time where people say, annuities are horrible. Some are. Not all of them are. It depends on what your needs are, and it depends on the company you're using. I've heard people say, don't buy term life insurance. My parents have whole life. That's what we all need. It's an investment and life insurance. We'll have a conversation about that another time. There is another one I've heard a lot lately about how you should use ETFs over mutual funds because mutual funds are expensive. Well, they serve different purposes. There's times where the active management inside a mutual fund is what you need. There's times where passive management is fine, which is what you get in an ETF. But, to make broad topics, you can find things to just confirm your bias if you're not careful, instead of finding balanced information, which really is part of why we started this show, was to try to give some balanced approach, which, as I mentioned, we have some biases ourselves. We're going to own that. We're biased towards planning. But if you can take time to educate yourself through some unbiased resources, I think you can be less fearful in general, and you can learn from the mistakes you do make so that you can make better decisions later. All right, it's time for our 2 cents, so I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll wrap up.
If you've already been burned, somewhere in the past, it's important to get back in and have a plan on how to not get burned the next time and be prepared for those market volatility. And I just think it's great to come in and talk to an advisor and see what they have to say.
Awesome. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm going to hide out from the sun when possible. That's just, I was sitting underneath an umbrella all weekend this weekend at a soccer field. But what I won't do is avoid being outside just to not get sunburned, because life is happening all around me. I've learned to manage that risk. And that's the key here. You've got to learn to manage the risk of investing in a way that makes sense to you. So don't just go hiding. Don't just stay out of the market. You are going to have a hard time reaching those goals elsewhere. But take some time to educate yourself and really find that success. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on Talking Sense this week. We look forward to catching you again next week. Thanks for listening to Talking Sense. And if you like what you hear, make sure and subscribe to the podcast to get all the newest episodes. The Jim Wealth team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or by calling our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. And while we like to have fun here, we're also financial advisors, and that means disclosures. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and Jim Wealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.